Hello, hello, hello. Happy New Year's. This is a continuation of a reading series. We are on chapter 9 at the moment. And yes, here we go. Getting better articulation and eloquency in my speech. Mm, that shit lines up. No, and understood. Because we couldn't conceive of the dimension to which we were blind. Then one day, something happened that makes no sense in our two-dimension world, and we catch our first glimpse of another dimension. In all human culture, the social world has two clear dimensions: a horizontal dimension of closeness or liking, and a vertical one of hierarchy or status. People naturally and effortlessly make distinctions along the horizontal dimension between close versus distant kin and between friend versus strangers. Many languages have one form of address for those who are close to in French, and another for those who are distant. Vos, to vos. We also have a great deal of innate mental structure that prepares us for hierarchical interactions, even in hunter gatherer cultures that are in many ways egalitarian. Egalitarian. Equality is only maintained by active suppression of ever-present tendencies towards hierarchy. Many languages uses the same verbal method to mark hierarchy as they do mark closeness. In French, tu for subordinate as well as friend, vos for superior as well as stranger. Even in language such as English that do not have different verbs form for different social relationships. People find a way to mark them anyway. We address people who are distant or superior by using their titles and last name, Mr. Smith, George Brown, and use first names for those who are in intimate or subordinates. Our minds automatically keep track of those two dimensions. Think how awkward it was the last time someone you barely knew but greatly revered, revered, revered. Someone you greatly revered invited you to call him by first name. Did the name stick in your throat? Conversely, when a salesperson addresses you by first name without having been invited to do so, do you feel slightly offended? Now imagine yourself happily moving around your two-dimensional social world, a flat land where the x-axis is closeness and the y-axis is hierarchy. See figure 9. Okay, no, I shouldn't be. Then one day you see a person do something extraordinary, or you have an overwhelming experience of natural beauty, and you feel lifted up. But it's not the up of hierarchy. It's some other kind of elevation. This chapter is about the vertical movement. My claim is that the human mind perceives a third dimension, a specifically moral dimension that I will call divinity. See the in choosing the label divinity, I am not assuming that God exists and is there to be perceived. I myself am atheist. What, a Jewish atheist? Rather, my research on the moral emotion has led me to conclude that the human mind simply does perceive divinity and sacredness, whether or not God exists. In reaching this conclusion, I lost the small concept for religion that I felt in my 20s. This chapter is about the ancient truths that the devoutly religious people grasp and that secular thinkers often do not. That by our actions and our thoughts, we move up and down on a vertical dimension in the opening epigraph, in the opening epigraph of this chapter. Mengtu, Mengtu called it's a dimension of noble versus ignoble. Mohammed, like Christians and Jews before him, made it a dimension of divinity with angles above the beast below. An implication of this truth is that we are impoverished as human beings when we lose sight of this dimension and let our world collapse into two dimensions. But at the other extreme, the efforts to create a three-dimensional society and impose it on all residents is the hallmark of religious fundamentalism. Fundamentalists, whether Christian, Jewish, Hindu, or Muslim, want to live in a nation whose laws are in harmony with or are taken from a particular holy book. There are many reasons for democratic Western societies to oppose such fundamentalism, but I believe that the first step in such opposition must be an honest and respectful understanding of its moral motives. I hope this chapter contributes to such understanding. I first found divinity in disgust. Are we not animals? I first found divinity in disgust. When I began to study morality, when I began to study morality, I read the moral code of many cultures. And the first thing I learned is that most cultures are very concerned about food, sex, menstruation, and the handling of corpse. Because I had always thought morality was about how people treat each other, I dismissed all this stuff about purity and pollution as the anthropologist calls it, an extraneous to real morality, as extraneous to real morality. Why are women in many cultures forbidden to enter temples or touch religious artifacts while they are menstruating or for a few weeks after giving birth? It must be some sort of sexist effort to control women. Why is eating pork an abomination for Jews and Muslims? Must be a health related effort to avoid uh, trichinosis, trichinosis. But as I read further, I began to discern an underlining underlying logic, the logic of disgust. According to the leading theory of disgust in the 1980s by Paul Rosen, disgust is largely about animals and the product of animal bodies. Few plants or inorganic materials are disgusting, and disgusting things are contagious by touch. Disgust, therefore, seemed somehow related to the concern about animals, body products, blood, excrement, washing, and touch that are so clear in the Old Testament, the Quran, Hindu scriptures, and many uh, etho- ethographies of traditional society. When I went to talk to Rosen about the possible role of disgust in morality and religion, I found that he had been thinking about the same question with Professor Clark Macaulay of Brymore College. We began to study disgust, the role it plays in social life. Disgust has its evolutionary origins in helping people decide what to eat. During the evolutionary transition in which our ancestors' brain expanded greatly, so did their production of tools and weapons, and so did their consumption of meat. Many scientists think these changes were all interrelatable. Many scientists think these changes were all interrelatable, along with the greater intrepidence, intrepid, intre- inter, interdependence of male and female that I discussed in chapter 6. Okay, interdependence. But when early humans went for meats, including scavenging the carcasses left by other predators, they exposed themselves to a galaxy of new microbes and parasites, most of which are contagious in a way that plant toxins are not. If a poisonous berry, if a poisonous berry bushes, or if a poisonous berry brushes up against your baked potato, it won't make the potato harmful or disgusting. Disgust was originally shaped by natural selection guardian, as a guardian of mouth. Guardian of mouth. It gave an advantage to individuals who went beyond the sensory properties of a potential edible object. Does it smell good? And thought about where it came from, and thought about where it came from and what it had touched. Animals that routinely eat or crawl on corpse excrement or garbage piles trigger disgust in us. We won't eat them, and anything they have touched becomes contaminated. We are also disgusted by most of the body products of other people, particularly excrement, mucus, and blood, which may transmit diseases among people. Disgust extinguishes desire, hunger, and motivates purifying behavior such as washing, or if it's too late, vomiting. But disgust doesn't guard just the mouth. Elicitors it elicitors expanded during its elicitors expanded during biological and cultural evolution, so that now it guards the body more generally. Discourse plays a role in sexuality, analogy to its role in food selections by guiding people to the narrow class of culturally accepted sexual partners and sexual acts. Once again, disgust turns off desire and motivates concerns about purification, separation, and cleaning and cleansing. Disgust also gives us a quasi feeling when we see people with skin lesions, deformities, and amputation. Extreme obesity or thickness and other violations of the ideal outer envelopes of human. The culturally ideal outer envelope of human bodies. It is the exterior that matters. Cancer in the lungs or a missing kidney is not disgusting. A tumor on the face or a missing finger is. This expansion from guardian of the mouth to guardian of the body makes sense from a purely biological perspective. We humans have always lived in larger, denser groups than most other primates, and we live on the ground too, not in trees. So we were more exposed to the ravages of microbes and parasites that spread by physical contact. Disgust makes us careful about contact, but the most fascinating thing about disgust is that it is recruited it is recruited to support so many of the norms, ritual, and beliefs that cultures use to define themselves. For example, many cultures draw a sharp line between humans and animal, and insisting that humans are somehow above, better than, or more godlike than other animals. The human body is often thought of as a temple that houses divinity within. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God, and that you are not your own? Therefore, glorifying God in your body. Corinthians 6:19-20. Yet a culture that says that humans are not animals or that the body is a temple faces a big problem. Our bodies do all the same things that animals do, that animals' bodies do, including eating, defecating, copulating, bleeding, and dying. The overwhelming evidence is that we are animals, and so a culture that rejects our animality must go to great lengths to hide the evidence. Biological processes must be carried out in the right way, and disgust is a guardian of that rightness. Imagine visiting a town where people wear no clothes, never bathe, have sex, doggy style in public, and eat raw meat by biting off pieces directly from the carcass. Okay, perhaps you would pay to see such a freak show. Perhaps you pay to see such a freak show, but as well as freak shows, you would emerge degraded, literally brought down. You would feel disgust at this savage behavior and know viscerally that there was something wrong with these people. Disgust is the guardian of the temple of the body. Disgust is the guardian of the temple of the body. In this imaginary town, the guardian have been murdered and the temples have gone to the dogs. The idea that the third dimension, divinity, runs from animals below to gods above, with people in the middle, was perfectly captured by the 17th century New England Puritan Cotton Mather, who observed a dog urinating at the same time he himself was urinating, overwhelmed with disgust at the vileness of his own urination. Mather wrote this solution in his diary. Yet I will be a more noble creature, and at the very time when my natural necessities debase me into the conditions of the beast, my spirit shall, I say at the very time, rise and soar. What? Yet I will be a more noble creature, and at the very time when my natural necessities debase me into the condition of the beast, my spirit shall rise and soar. If the human body is a temple that sometimes gets dirty, it makes sense that cleanliness is next to godliness. If you don't perceive this third dimension, then it is not clear why God would care about the amount of dirt on your skin or in your home. But if you do live in a third dimension world, then disgust is like Jacob's ladder. It's rooted in the earth, in our biological necessities, but it leads or guides people towards heaven, or at least towards something felt or at least towards something felt to be somehow up. The ethics of divinity. After graduate school, I spent 2 years working with Richard Schuder. I spent 2 years working with Richard Schuder, a psychological anthropologist at the University of Chicago, who is the leading thinker in the field of cultural psychology. Schuder does much of his research in the Indian city of Budansye, Budaswar, Bhubaneswar, Bhubaneswar, in the state of Orissa on the Bay of Bengal. Buddheswar is an ancient temple town. Its old city grew up around a gigantic and ornate Lingaraj, uh, Lingaraj temple, built in the 17th century and still a major pilgrimage center for Hindus. Shuda's research on morals, Sutra's research on morality in Bhubaneswar and elsewhere shows that when people think about morality, their moral concept clusters into three groups, which he calls the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of community, and the ethics of divinity. When people think and act using the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of autonomy. Their goal is to protect individuals from harm and grant them the maximum degree of autonomy, which they can use to pursue their own goal. When people use the ethics of community, their goal is to protect the integrity of groups, families, companies, or nations. And they value virtues such as obedience, loyalty, and wise leadership. When people use the ethics of divinity, their goal is to protect from the degradation, the divinity that exists in each person, and they value living in a pure and holy way, free from moral pollution such as lust, greed, and hatred. Cultures vary in their relative resilience on these three ethics, which correspond roughly to the XYZ axis. In my dissertation research in my dissertation research on moral judgment in Brazil in my dissertation research in moral judgment in Brazil and the United States, I found that educated Americans of high social class relied overwhelmingly on the ethics of anonymity, on the ethics of autonomy in their moral discourse, whereas Brazilians and people of lower social class in both countries made much greater use of their ethics of community and divinity. To learn more about the ethics of divinity, I went to Brisbane War for 3 months in 1993 to interview priests, monks, and other experts on another experts on Hindu worships and practice. To prepare, I read everything I could about Hinduism and the anthropology of purity and pollution, including the laws of Manu, the laws of Manu, a guidebook for Brahmin, a guidebook for Brahmin men, the priestly caste. Written in the first or second century, Manu tells Brahmins, Brahmins men, Manu tells Brahmins how to live, eat, pray, and interact with other people while still attending to what cutting matter called their natural necessities. In one passage, Manu lists the times when a priest should not even think about reciting the holy Vedas scriptures, the holy Vedas, while while expelling urine or excrement when food is still left on his mouth and hands, while eating at a cemetery for the dead, when one has eaten flesh or the food of a woman who has just given birth, when jackals howl in a cremation ground, when jackals howl in a cremation ground, while wearing a garment that he has worn in sexual union, while accepting anything as a ceremony for the dead, when one has just eaten or has not when one has not eaten, has just eaten or has not digested his food, or has vomited or bleached, when blood flows from one's limbs, or when one has been wounded by a weapon. This passage is extraordinary because it lists every category of disgust that Rosen, Macaulay, and I have studied: food, body products, animal sex, deaths, body envelope body envelope violations, and hygiene. Man is saying that the presence in mind of the holy Vedas is not compatible with contamination of the body from any source of disgust. Divinity and disgust must be kept separate at all times. When I arrived in Boban's War, I quickly found that the ethics of divinity is not just ancient history. Even though Boban's War is physically flat, it has a highly variable spiritual topology. It has a highly variable spiritual topology with peak mm, with peaks at each of its hundreds of temples. As a non-Hindu, I was allowed into the courtyard of the temple compound, and if I removed my shoes and any leather items, leather is polluting, I could usually enter the antechamber. I could usually enter the antechamber of the temple antechamber of the temple building. I could look into the inner sanctum where the god was. Uh, I could look into the inner sanctum where the god was housed, but had I crossed the threshold to join the Brahmin priest within, I would have polluted it and offended everyone. At the highest peak of divinity, the Lingarage temple itself, I was not even allowed to enter the compound, although foreigners were invited to look in from an observation platform just outside the wall. It was not a matter of secrecy. It was a matter of contamination by people such as me who had not followed the proper procedures of bathing, diet, hygiene, and prayer for maintaining religious purity. Hindus whom in Brisbane's war have the same concretion, conscription, concentric, sorry, has the same concentric structure as the temples. Leave your shoes at the door. Socialize in the outer room, but never go into the kitchen or the room or area where offerings are made to deities. These two areas are maintained as zones of the highest purity. Even the, even the human body has peaks and valleys. The head and the right hand being pure, the left hand and the feet being polluted. I had to take extraordinary care to keep my feet from touching anyone and to avoid handing something to any sorry and avoid handing something to any person with my left hand. As I moved around Buddhist Bane Wall, I felt like a square in spaceland as I tried to navigate a three-dimension world with only the dimmest perception of its third dimension. Like the third dimension. The interviews I conducted helped me to see a little better. My goal was to find out whether purity and pollutions were really just about keeping biological necessities separate from divinity, or whether these practices had a deeper relationship to virtue and morality. I found a variety of opinions. Some of the less educated village priests saw the rituals related to purity and pollution as basic rules of the game, things you simply must do because religious traditions demands it. But many of the people I interviewed took a broader view and saw purity and pollution particles practices as means to an end, spiritual and moral advancement. or moving up on the third dimension. For example, when I asked why it was important to guard one's purity, the headmaster of a Sanskrit school, a school that trains religious scholars, responded in this way: we ourselves can be gods or demons. It depends on karma. If a person behaves like a demon, for example, he kills someone, then the person is truly a demon. A person who behaves in a divine manner because a person has divinity in him, he is like a god. We should know that we are gods. If we think like gods, we become like gods. If we think like demons, we become like demons. What is wrong with being like a demon? What is going on nowadays? It is demonic. Divine behavior means not cheating people, not killing people, complete character. You have divinity. You are a god. You have divinity. You are a god. What the headmaster, who of course had not read Schroeder's Schroeder, the headmaster who had not read Schroeder gave a perfect statement of the ethics of divinity. Purity is not just about the body, it is about the soul. If you know that you have divinity in you, you will act accordingly. You will treat people well, and you will treat your body as a temple. In so doing, you will accumulate good karma, and you will come back in your next life at a higher level, literally higher, or on the vertical dimension of divinity. If you lose sight of your divinity, you will give in to your baser motives. You will give in to your baser motives. In so doing, you will accumulate bad karma, and in your next incarnation, you will return at a lower level as an animal or a demon. This linkage of virtue, purity, and divinity is not uniquely Indian. Ralph Waldo Emerson said exactly the same thing. He who does a good deed is instantly ennobled. He who does a mean deed is by the action itself contracted. He who puts off impurity thereby puts on purity. If a man is at heart just, if a man is at heart just, then in so far is he God. Then in so far is he God. If a man is at heart just, then in so far is he God. Then in so far is he God. Sacred intrusion. When I returned to Flatland, the United States, I didn't have to think about purity and pollution anymore. I didn't have to think about the second dimension hierarchy very much, the second dimension hierarchy very much. Either American university culture has only mild hierarchy. Students often address professors by first name, compared with most Indian settings. So in some ways, my life was reduced to one dimension, closeness, and my behavior was constrained only by the ethics of autonomy, which allowed me to do whatever I wanted as long as I didn't hurt anyone else. Yet, once I had learned to see in three dimensions, I saw glimmers of divinity scattered all about. I began to feel disgust for the American practice of marching around one's own house, even one's bedroom, wearing the same shoes that minutes earlier had walked through city streets. I adopted the Indian practice of removing my shoes at my door and asking visitors to do likewise, which made my apartment feel more like a sanctuary, a clean and peaceful space separated more fully than before. from the outside world, I noticed that I felt wrong to bring certain books into the bathroom. I noticed that people often spoke about morality using a language of higher and lower. I became aware of my own subtle feelings of witnessing people my own subtle feelings upon witnessing people behaving in sleazy or degrading ways, feeling that we are more than just disapproval. They were feelings of having been brought down in some way myself. In my academic work, I discovered that the ethics of divinity had been central to public disclosure in the United States until the time of the World War One, after which it began to fade, except in a few places such as American South, which also maintained racial segregation practice based on the notion of physical purity. For example, advice aimed at young people in the Victorian area routinely spoke of purity and pollution in a widely reprinted book from 1897 titled What a Young Man Ought to Know. Salvanus Store devoted an entire chapter to personal purity, in which he noted that God has made no mistakes in giving man a strong sexual nature, but any young man makes a fatal mistake if he allows the sexual to dominate, to degrade, and to destroy that which is highest and noblest in his nature. To guard their purity, Stowe advised young men to avoid eating pork, masturbating, and reading novels. What? By the 1936 edition, their entire chapter had been removed. The vertical dimension of divinity was so obvious to people in the Victorian age that even scientists referred to it in a chemistry textbook from 1867, after describing methods of synthesizing ethyl alcohol. The author felt compelled to warn his young readers that alcohol has the effects of dulling the intellectual operations and moral instincts, seems to prevent and destroy all that is pure and holy in man, while it robs him of his highest attributes, reason, reason. In his 1892 book promoting Darwin's theory of evolution, Joseph Lee Conte, a professor of geology at the University of California at Berkeley, practically quoted Mengsun and Mohammed. Man is possessed of two natures, a lower in common with animals and a higher particular to himself. The whole meaning of sin is the humiliating bondage of the higher to the lower. But as science, technology, and the industrial age progressed, the Western world became hmm, the Western world became desacralized. At least that's the argument made by the great historian of religion, uh, Misan Eliad. In the sacred and profane, in the sacred and the profane, Eliad shows that the perception of sacredness is a high in the perception of sacredness is a human universal. Is a wait, what? Elias shows that the perception of sacredness is a human universal. Is a human universal. Regardless of their difference, all religions have places, temples, shrines, holy trees, times, holy days, sunrise. Religions have places, times, and activities that allow for contact or communication with something otherworldly and pure to make of sacredness. All other times, places, and activities are defined as profane. The border between The sacred and the profane must be carefully guarded, and that's the rule of purity. And the pollutions are all about Iliad says, uh, it's as and that's the rule, and that's what rules and that's what rules of purity and pollutions are all about. Eliad says that the modern West is the first culture in human history that has managed to strip time and space of all sacredness and to produce a fully practical, efficient, and profane world. This is the world that religious fundamentalists find unbearable and are sometimes willing to use force to fight against. Eliad's most compelling point for me is that sacredness is so irrepressible that it intrudes repeatedly into the modern profane world in the form of crypto-religious behavior. Eliad noted that even a person committed to profane existence has privileged places quantitatively different from all others. A man's birth, a man's birthplace or the sense of his first love, or certain places in the as the first foreign city he visited in his youth, even for the most frankly non-religious man, all these places still retain an exceptional, a unique quality. They are the holy places of his private universe, as if it were in such spots that he had received the revelation of a reality other than that in which he participates through his ordinary daily life. When I read this, I gasped. Iliad had perfectly pegged my feeble spirituality, limited as it is to places, books, people, and events that have given me moments of uplift and enlightenment. Even atheists have imitations of sacredness, particularly when in love or in nature. We just don't infer that God caused those feelings, elevation, and agape. My time in India did not make me religious, but it did lead me to an intellectual awakening. Shortly after moving to the University of Virginia in 1995, I was writing yet another article about how social discourse is triggered when we see people moving down on the vertical dimension of divinity. Suddenly, it occurred to me that I had never really thought about the emotional reaction to seeing people move up. I had referred in passing to the feeling of being uplifted, but had never even wondered whether uplift is a real, honest to goodness emotion. I began to interrogate friends, family, and students. When you see someone do a really good deed, do you feel something? What exactly, where in your body do you feel it? Does it matter to you? Does it make you want to do anything? I found that most people had the same feeling I did and the same difficulty articulating exactly what they were. People talked about an open, warm, or glowing feeling. Some specifically mentioned the heart. Others claimed that they could not say where in their bodies they felt it, yet, even as they were denying a specific location, their hands sometimes, yet, even as their hands sometimes made a circular motion in form of the chest, fingers pointing inward, as in as if to indicate something moving in the heart. Some people mentioned feelings of chill or of choking up. Most said this feeling made them want to perform good deeds or become better people or become better in some way. Whether this feeling was it's whether this feeling was it was beginning to look like an emotion worth of study. Yet there was no research of any kind on this emotion in the psychological literature. which was focused at the time on the six basic emotions known to have distinctive facial expressions: joy, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and surprise. If I believed in God, I would believe that He sent me to the University of Virginia for a reason. At UVA, a great deal of crypto religious activities centers around Thomas Jefferson, our founder, whose home sits like a temple on a small mountain tip, Monte Monticello, a few miles away. Jefferson wrote the holiest text of American history, the Declaration of Independence. He also wrote thousands of letters, many of which reveal his views on psychology, education, and religion. After arriving at UVA, having an Eliot-style crypto-religious experience at Monticello, and committing myself to the cult of Jefferson, I read a collection of his letters. There, I found a full and perfect description of the emotion I had just begun thinking about. In 1771, Jefferson's relative, Robert Skipwith, asked him for advice on what books to buy for the personal library he hoped to build. Jefferson, who loved giving advice almost as much as he loved books, happily obliged. Jefferson sent along a catalogue of serious works of history and philosophy, but he also recommended the purchase of fiction. In his day, as in Savannah Stalls, plays and novels were not regarded as worthy of a dignified man's time. But Jefferson justifies his unorthodox advice by pointing out that great writing can trigger beneficial emotions when any act of charity or of gratitude, for instance, is presented either to our sight or imagination. We are deeply impressed with the beauty and feel a strong desire in ourselves of doing charitable and grateful acts also. On the contrary, when we see or read any atrocious deed, we are disgusted with his deformity and conceive an abhorrence of vice. Now, every emotion of this kind is an exercise of our virtuous disposition and disposition of the mind, like limbs of the body acquire strength by exercise. Jefferson went on to say that the physical feeling and motivational effects caused by great literature are as powerful as those caused by real events. He considered the example of a contemporary French play, asking whether the fidelity and generosity of its hero does not. He considered the example of contemporary French plays, asking whether the fidelity and generosity of its heroes does not dilate breast and elevate his sentiments as much as any similar incident which real history can can furnish which real history can furnish. Does the reader not in fact feel himself a better man while reading them, and privately covenant to copy the fair example? This extraordinary statement is more than just a poetic description of the joy of reading. It is also a precise scientific definition of an emotion. In emotion research, we generally study emotions by specifying their components, and Jefferson gives us most of the major concepts on eliciting or triggering conditions, displaying displays of charity, gratitude, or other virtues, physical changes in the body, deliberation in the chest, a motivation, a desire of doing charitable and grateful acts also, and a characteristics feeling beyond bodily sensation, elevated sentiments. Jefferson had described exactly the emotions I had just discovered. He even said that it was the opposite of disgust as an act of crypto-religious glorification. As an act of crypto-religious glorification, I considered calling this emotion Jefferson's emotion, but thought better of it and chose the word elevation, which Jefferson himself had used to capture the sense of rising on a vertical dimension away from disgust. For the past 7 years, I have been studying elevation in the lab. My students and I have used a variety of means to induce elevation, and have found that video clips from documentaries about heroes and altruists, selection from the Oprah Winfrey Show work well in most of our studies. In most of our studies, we show people in one group an elevation video. Sorry, we show people in one group an elevating video while people in the control condition see a video designed to amuse them, such as a Jerry Seinfeld monologue. We know from Alice Essen's coin and cookie studies that feeling happy brings a variety of positive effects. So in our research, we always try to show that elevation is not just a form of happiness. Elevation is not just a form of happiness. In most comprehensive studies, Sarah Algor and I showed videos to research subjects in the lab and had social studies in the lab and had them fill out a recording sheet about what they felt and what they wanted to do. Sarah then gave them a stack of blank recording sheets, and told them to keep an eye out for the next 3 weeks. For instance, for of someone doing something good for someone else in the elevation condition, or for times when they saw someone else tell a joke in the amusement/control condition. We also added a third condition to study non-normal administrations, non-normal administration. People in this condition watched a video about the superhuman ability of the basketball star Michael Jordan, and were then asked to record times when they witnessed someone doing something un, uh, unusually skillful. Both parts of Sarah's study said that Jefferson got it exactly right. People really do respond emotionally to acts of moral beauty, and these emotional reactions involve warm or pleasant feeling in the chest and conscious desire to help others or become a better person oneself. A new d- a new discovery in Sarah's study is that moral elevation appears to be different from administration. For non-normal excellence, subjects in the administration condition were more likely to report feeling chill or tingles on their skin, to report feeling energized or psyched up. Witnessing extraordinarily skillful actions gives people the drive and energy to try to copy these actions. Elevation, in contrast, is a calmer feeling not associated with signs of psychological arousal. This distinction might help explain a puzzle about elevation. Although people say in all our studies that they want to do good deeds, in two studies where we gave them the opportunity to sign up for volunteer work or to help an experimenter pick up a stack of papers she had dropped. We did not find elevation, that elevation made people behave much differently. What's going on here? What's going on here? How could an emotion that makes people rise on the dimension of divinity not make them behave more altruistically, more altruistically? It's too soon to know for sure. It's too soon to know for sure, but a recent finding suggests that love could be the answer. Three undergraduate honor students have worked with me on the psychosis, the physiology of elevation. Chris Ovis, Grace Sherman, and Jen Silvers were all being intrigued by the frequently. Were all with and Jen Silvers with all being intrigued by the frequency with which people were feeling elevation points in their hearts, and in which people were feeling elevation points to the heart. We believe they are not just speaking metaphorically. Chris and Gray have found hints that the vagus nerve might be activated during elevation. The vagus nerve is the main nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms people down and undoes the arousal caused by the sympathetic fight or flight system. The vagus nerve is the main nerve that controls heart rates, and it has a variety of other effects on the heart and lungs. So if people feel something in the chest, the vagus nerve in the main suspect, and it has already been implicated in research on feelings of gratitude, appreciation, but it's difficult to measure the activities of the vagus nerve differently. Vagus nerve in the main suspect, and it's already been implicated in research on feeling of gratitude and appreciation, but it's difficult to measure the activities of the vagus nerve differently, of the vagus nerve directly, and so far Chris and Gray have found only hints, not conclusive proof. Nerves have accomplished nerves have accomplished Nerves have accomplices. However, they sometimes work with hormones to produce long-lasting effects, and the vagus nerve works with the hormone oxytocin to create feelings of calmness, love, and desire for the contact that encourage bonding and attachment. Jen Silvers was interested in the possible role of oxytocin in elevation, but because we did not have the resources to draw blood from subjects before and after watching an elevation video, which would have which would which we have which we'd have to do to detect a change in oxytocin level. I told Jen to scour the research literature to find an indirect measure, something oxytocin does to people, something oxytocin does, something something oxytocin does to people that we could measure without a hypodermic needle. Jen found lactation one of oxytocin's many jobs is to regulate the attachment of mothers and children, is to trigger the release of milk in the mother who breastfeed. In one of the boldest undergraduate honors these ever done in the UVA psychology department, Jen brought 45 lactating mothers into our lab, one at a time, with their babies, and asked them to insert nutrition pads into their bras. Half the women then watched an elevating clip from an Oprah Winfrey show about a musician who, after expressing his gratitude to the music teacher who have saved him from a life of gang violence, finds out that Oprah has brought in some of his own students to express their gratitude to him. The other model saw a video clip featuring several. The other model saw a video clip featuring control administrative control, bro. All right, guys, that's it. I am beat. I am beat like a meat. I'm beat. Which once I read, so I have 2 more chapters to go before I finally finish this book. About like 8 months. Sheesh. Next book will be way shorter. I'll finish it way faster. Nice. All right. So those